Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this program tonight, Beyond Black History Month Educators in Conversation. My name is Michael Sawyer, and I'm the president of the Black Student Union at Capital Community College and museum interpreter here at the Old State House. Before I introduce the panel and moderator, I would like to introduce you to the Public Programs and Exhibitions Manager here at Connecticut's Old State House, Mariana Garcia.
Right, thank you, Michael. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Evening Conversations at Connecticut's Old State House. We're very happy to see you here, all of you. If you're here in person or watching us online, welcome. And we're very happy to be having this program, this event here tonight, and we're just so happy to be partnering with our neighbors at Capital Community College for this program. And I want to thank especially Michael for being our liaison and sort of the driving force behind this program. And behind this partnership, here in the Old State House, we tell a lot of stories. And one of our cornerstone stories is actually the Amistad trial, which took place right here in this room where we are right now. And also, this is the room where Nancy Jackson faced her enslaver, James Bullock, and sued him for her freedom. And upstairs in the Legislative Hall, we have our original Statue of Justice, which Samson Easton, who was a member of Talcott Street Church, climbed up to the roof in the middle of the night and draped a black veil on top of the statue as an act of civil disobedience against the execution of John Brown, which was going to take place the very next day. So these are just a few of the many stories that we tell here at the Old State House. And because of these stories is why we wanted to host this program here tonight. Because when we tell these stories, when we're teaching these stories to our visitors, we want to be able to do it with intent and with purpose. And to be able to do that, we need to have conversations and discussions like the one where we're going to have here tonight. So I hope you all enjoy the panel this evening and also the roundtable discussions that we're going to have afterwards. And I want to thank our partners from Capital, Dr. Harris, and also Michael, and all of you for coming here tonight and taking part in our discussion. So good evening, and thank you very much. Michael.
Thank you so much, Mariana, for those words. Beyond Black History Month is a program dedicated to discussion and questions on why should we celebrate Black History Month? If just having one month is enough to cover all of Black history, if the way it's being taught in American education system is good enough, and more. With me are panelists of Black educators in Connecticut throughout many levels of the education system, and our moderator of the evening, Dr. Duncan Harris at Capital Community College, to delve more into these topics. The Capital Community College Black Student Union and the Old State House staff members contributed these questions for our evening event. After we wrap up the discussion, we will have a 10-minute Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a staff member will come to you with a microphone. If you're watching online, please leave us a question in the comment section of the video. Right after the Q&A, Roundtable World Cafe, where you guys will be able to have conversations of your own regarding Black history based on some questions at each of the tables with some light refreshments in the Treasurer's Office and Executive Office across the hall. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our moderator for the evening, Dr. G. Duncan Harris. Dr. G. Duncan Harris has over 25 years of experience in higher education and serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Capital Community College in Hartford, Connecticut, a position he has held since 2018. In this role, he is responsible for strategic direction and daily operations of the college. He's recognized as an expert in student success and retention, is invited to lecture on the field to graduate students, and take pride in his roles as a mentor and coach to many community college professionals. Dr. Harris holds a doctorate of education from Nova Southeastern University, a Master of Science degrees in counseling from CCSU, a Bachelor of Science degree in economics from UConn, and certificate in management and leadership from Harvard University. Dr. Harris, thank you for joining us tonight.
Glad to be here. All right. Yeah. Well, it's indeed an honor to be here, for our supporting our students at Capital Community College. And so I wanted to recognize all of our students here and thank them for taking the baton up for our Black History Month program. Of course, we know that Black history is celebrated 365 days a year, and Black history is American history or world history. However, we find it important to elevate and amplify Black history during the month of February. And so, so this is in that spirit which we'll have the dialogue today. Once again, recognizing that Black history is world history, U.S. history, and that it's every day. And every day our students make history and we make history. And so it's indeed an honor to be with everybody tonight. I was joking with our panelists a little bit earlier that I could do 45 minutes on my own. However, I won't tonight, and all of my colleagues from Capitol know that I can, and so I certainly won't be doing that tonight. And so we're going to focus on their experiences and their knowledge as it relates to the topic. And so what I'd ask is if each of the panelists could introduce themselves, and so if we could do that, what your current role is, and what is your experience in terms of Black history for yourself, either as a student or teaching it in our schools. And so we'll start with Professor Freeman.
Certainly, certainly. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Harris. My name is Seth Freeman. I'm a professor right down the street at Capitol Community College. I'm a professor of computer science, so my background is in computer science. And I've had the privilege of teaching at Capitol since about 2002, and it's really a privilege to serve our community and teach at Capitol. I will be honest, and I'm the lightweight on the panel as not a historian, so I want to give that caveat, but I'm happy to share my experience in teaching computer science and how we try in our computer science curriculum to make our curriculum culturally relevant, which is a challenge, but that's what we try, and I'll talk about that some more as we have an opportunity. My experience with Black history is certainly a more personal one. I took some coursework in undergraduate and had a privilege of having parents who felt it was extremely important to learn about Black history and American history. So I'll be able to share on a personal level some of my experience. But happy to be on the panel, and thank you, Dr. Harris.
Okay. Next up, Professor Lawson.
Yes, my name is Marcus Lawson. I'm professor of history at Capitol Community College. I've been teaching, oh my goodness, since 2002, 2004 for the college. And I was approached by my chair at the time to develop Black history at the college. I've been teaching Black history both, from the inception of time in Africa to the slave trade, from the Civil War all the way to the modern era for almost about 20 years now, I do believe. And that's pretty much my experience in teaching Black history.
Awesome. Professor Perez.
My name is Shakira Perez. I am an English teacher at Harvard Public Schools at Classical Magnet. I'm also an adjunct professor at University of St. Joseph. Obviously, I'm an English teacher, so I don't teach much history. However, I do teach history in a different way. For me, teaching history is more of my students come in, they see a Black woman that speaks Spanish. And they're like, what? What? Your last name is Perez? Is that a married name? So it becomes this whole thing, and I say, no, Puerto Ricans are very dark. We speak Spanish, and then I have to tell them all about that history as well. So for me, it starts the first day of school because they just don't understand why I speak Spanish.
Awesome. Love it, love it. So I'm looking forward to this next 40 minutes with you all. So the one of the through lines that I hope that the audience was able to discern from the initial comments is this idea of the profession of teaching, right? And so we can certainly reference the importance of access to education as it relates to a people. And I'd imagine over the course of time, we talk about how access to education has been denied to Black people in particular. And so what I wanted to do was have you talk about this profession that you've decided to enter into in terms of teaching, and perhaps if you could connect that or tie that into your experience as a person of color in this space and what that means. And so we'll go back this way. And so we'll start with Professor Perez.
So I started teaching when I was 8. Just teaching all the stuffed animals, punishing
Nice,
them.
love it.
Telling them to be quiet. And so that's just what I've always wanted to do. At one point when I was in high school, my family tried to, deflect me from that and say, no, you should go into nursing because you'll always have a job. And I was like, well, don't we always need teachers? So I listened because, I was young and impressionable. So I listened, and so I did. I started off as a nursing major, and I hated it. I don't like bodily fluids. So I was like, this is dumb. There's no point of me doing this. And I remember, so I also attended St. Joseph College. You guys know it now as University of St. Joseph. But my advisor was a sister. And I remember I went to her office, and she wasn't there, so I left a little Post-it, and the Post-it said, I want to be a teacher now. So when she finally called me, she's like, Juana, you want to be a teacher? I'm like, oh, it's a joke. I know it's want to. So that started it. And I went back into it because I knew that's where my heart was. I knew that I had amazing teachers in high school throughout my time, but I can only remember 2 that were teachers of color. And so I wanted to become the teacher that I would have wanted. So I took everything that I learned from those amazing teachers that I had from elementary through high school. I took pieces of them with me, and I said, okay, I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a face for students. And I had to come back to Hartford for my students to see someone that looks like them and understands them and knows where they came from. So that's
Awesome.
basically.
Awesome. I love that.
Thank
so,
you.
Professor Lawson, same question. So, in terms of your passion for teaching and what caused you to go into the field.
I believe my passion for teaching came alive when I was a student at the college myself. It was a journey for me because my background is international relations. I got a BA, Bachelor's of Arts, and a Master's of Science in the discipline at Central Connecticut State University. And when I went to Central, it's international relations called area studies. And so you're studying different areas of the world, whether it's Latin America, Africa, Europe, or whatnot, the Middle East, or whatnot, what have you. And I'd already known as a child who Shirley Chisholm was, because I'm a product of Harvard schools. I went to Harvard schools. The teachers taught us, about King, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Ralph Bunche, Shirley Chisholm. So I already had that in me. But I had a broader question of how did we get to where we're at as a people? And that question wasn't being answered, and I went looking for answers in international relations. I took a lot of history at Central, so much so that I was one time in Europe, then I'm in Africa, then I'm in the Middle East. I'm moving all around Latin America. I'm a very curious person, and it is that with embedded in me, that journey to find out who we are as a people, why do we get to where we got. And while I was in graduate school, I came back to the college, and I spoke to one of our professors at the college, that's John Christie. And I was about a year away from getting my master's degree. And Dr. Christie was the one who says, Marcus, did you ever hear about the Minority Fellows Program? And I said, no, what is that? And he said, well, it's a program that actually ushers in underrepresented groups to become adjunct professors within the Connecticut State College university system. And I said, oh, really? He said, you can do this. I said, all right, who would I contact? And he told me who I could contact. And that what ended up happening, it's a long story, but I eventually got into the Minority Fellows Program. And that's how I started actually my teaching. And I brought international relations history with me and started dissecting what's going on in Africa, how it occurs, in building that bridge between the civil rights movement in the US and Pan-Africanism that basically came alive during W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey, their activism. And that's how I got into teaching.
Awesome. I could tell you're passionate about it.
Yeah.
Professor Freeman.
Well, I think looking back at how I got into this wonderful profession, I think at a young age I recognized that I enjoyed to work with people and help people, help my classmates when I was at a young age. And then when I got and started studying computer science and was fortunate to study that in undergraduate. I noticed in undergraduate and in graduate school that I was oftentimes the only person of color, only black person in most of my classes. And there weren't a lot of females when I was studying computer science. There certainly weren't a lot of African Americans. And as I really reflect on it, after I graduated and I started teaching, I realized that I had the ability to really come as a person of color and teach a subject area that many African Americans, frankly, still don't really think of pursuing, which is computer science. So I think that, and I also was a tutor when I was in college. I was tutoring math at the time. I think that's also when I kind of realized I enjoyed, sharing knowledge. But I think teaching is really a calling. I think you have to really love people if you're going to be a teacher, right? Because you have to invest so much of yourself to others. You have to care about others and want them to reach their full potential. And I think that's what all teachers, all educators have at heart. So, and I probably got that from my parents, who also had the fortune to have college education and instilled in me at a young age the importance of education. So, Capital is such a special place to teach, as Marcus and work, as many of us know, because we have such a diverse range of students that come to our campus. We have students with all different abilities, goals, backgrounds, and we have the ability to just work with students and impart what we know to them. So it's just so I think, but reflecting on the question, realizing at a young age that I cared about working with others and helping them, and I think that's the best part of our tradition. If we think about getting back to the topic of Black history, celebrating all of those who came before us to do anything we can do to make it better for the next generation.
Awesome. Yeah. So I did want to take a minute to honor your passion for the profession. It's probably one of the most noble professions. And so, once again, and as we engage in this conversation about the importance of history and having capable, competent teachers teaching it, how important that is. So I wanted to honor your service in that space. How does so as I harken back and I think about my my K-12 and then post-secondary experience, I always did what our students are doing today, but took advantage of the activities that would occur in Black History Month, whether that was at UConn. I went to Bloomfield Public Schools. I was very fortunate. Shout out to the Warhawks out there if you're there. 06, 02. All right. But just during that month, I'd be one of the ones that they would tap to, give a rendition of Dr. King's speech, or working with other students, like our students are, to ensure that there was appropriate programming, that reflected kind of Black history. And so, could you talk a little bit about whether that's at Capitol or prior to, or at Classical Magnet or St. Joe's, what types of activities are going on at those particular institutions to highlight the importance of Black history? And so we'll start with Professor Lawson.
Well, I gave a talk yesterday regarding Black in Space, breaking the color barrier. I teach Black history, U.S. history, Western civilization, world civilization, but essentially I am a sci-fi geek. I love, if I had the opportunity to become a scientist, I probably would have become a scientist, because I read everything. I read scientific journals, even if I don't understand it. I'm reading it, and I'm fascinated by it or whatnot. But I gave the talk yesterday, which is basically about diversity and inclusion, and the beginning of it, how the federal government mainstreamed it actually as a policy of federal hiring. And I felt it was important to have the talk because of the present situation that's going on in our country, with different types of political forces that want to divide us instead of bringing us together, and to remind us of the struggle and sacrifice that we have actually given for diversity and inclusion. And then I know that Professor Dr. Jeff Partridge, I've worked with him in Black Heritage Project.
Sure.
He's doing the Pennington series. He just had a talk at the Wadsworth with Jelani Cobb. There are quite a few activities that are going on because, when you talk about Black history, it's past and present and future as well too. And we have to acknowledge all of the instructors, whether that's their particular background or not, who are contributing to the enveloping story of Black history. So we got a lot going on at Capitol this semester. We really do, yeah.
Yeah, and if I might, and then I'll go to, Capitol was very fortunate to receive a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities that was really brought on by our students who identify an iconic figure in Hartford in terms of James W.C. Pennington and the history of the Talcott Street Church. Capitol actually sits adjacent to the site of the original church. And so every day our 2,401 students who are coming to our campus walk by hallowed ground, which was, and so this importance of history in our college space and what that means. And so I wanted to commend folks like Dr. Partridge and others and our students who really insisted that we bring that rich history to life. Capitol is one of the most diverse community colleges in New England, and is actually 37% Black, 33% Hispanic, 20% white, and 4% Asian, right? And so that is one of the greatest assets that we have, and so we hold up and elevate all of the cultures that are represented at our institution. And so what we'll do is we'll go to Professor Perez, and then we'll go back to Seth. So Professor Freeman.
So it's interesting. We didn't do anything as fancy as that over at Classical. I remember when I'm also a product of Hartford Public Schools, and I remember during Black History Month, there was a big show. There was an assembly, we all went to the auditorium. But when I think about it now, I feel like it's a lost tradition.
Yeah, it is.
And it's
It is.
sad.
It is.
It's sad.
It is.
It's just, for us, it's just the acknowledgement, like, hey, it's Black History Month. We may put a bulletin board up, but then that's it. So I know that at our school, we've been talking more about notable Black people that are more modern, not to disregard the older people and, the Frederick Douglasses, all of that. But it's like you mentioned earlier, like we are making history, the students are making history. So just discussing those more modern, notable Black people, and really connecting the young people to Black people that are making a difference. So even, Super Bowl was just this past weekend, and we talked about Rihanna. Of course, they were all excited. They were more excited about her pregnancy than they were about her. And I'm like, do y'all understand? This is a Black woman from an island who, because people from the islands are often disregarded and not thought of as people who can make it in the world, who is a billionaire, who has done all this stuff and has all of this. And so just talking about that so that they can see themselves, especially like the people, our students that come from Barbados and Jamaica and Puerto Rico, so that they, look, you are doing it. These are people that are in the diaspora that are making it happen.
Love that.
Yeah.
So just elevating that and giving that a space and letting them honor those people as well and celebrate them. So it's not, the big pomp and circumstance of the Black History Month program, but we're doing it in our own way.
Love that. Yeah. Professor Freeman.
No, I think, well, I'll just recognize the really remarkable programming that Professor Lawson has mentioned that we're putting on at Capitol, and the great work that BSU at Capitol is leading in the activities. And just quickly, just related to my experience in undergraduate, where I was a member of our Black Student Union. This was at Clark University in Massachusetts, in Worcester, and I have some of the most fondest memories of being a part of the Black Student Union and identifying just learning about culture through the activity that we had, which was we had different activities, very similar to what our students are doing now, and just finding activities that resonated with me as a young person. Many of them were social justice oriented. I remember our Black Student Union. This was years ago. We were talking about Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's still in prison to this day, and talking about the Black freedom movement, and how much now that resonates now with what's going on today. So there's opportunities for our youth to learn about Black history and learn about present actions and activities that are relevant, and just really finding yourself through these activities, which is why these activities are really so valuable.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I'm not sure that I'd be the head of a college had it not been for what I learned when I was in you guys' shoes as a student leader. I think I said that at the SGA meeting. And the skills that I learned about values and histories, how organizations are run and things like that. And so how important it is for institutions to insist on support for our student clubs and things like that. And as appropriate, follow their lead, right? To launch a Pennington series or bring to light rich history of the community within which we live. And so, oftentimes people don't recognize that each and every year the President of the United States, declares, Black History Month and signs a presidential proclamation that affirms the theme for the year as determined by another organization of Black scholarship.
Really? Okay.
That determines the theme. And so this year's theme, as defined, is Black resistance, right? I'd imagine we could look at what's occurring, throughout the nation and in certain spaces where all people and Black people in particular are being impacted, and a need to, in 2023, still resist certain forces that attempt to oppress people of color. And so, tying that to this question in terms of what do you see as the goal of celebrating Black History Month? Why do we need to kind of have this month where there's a particular theme, perhaps to draw attention to a cause that's as relevant as it may have been, when those first ships, arrived on these shores, conceptually, right? In terms of Black resistance, what happened in this space, in this building. And do you feel that this Black History Month and the way in which we acknowledge it and celebrate it now is fulfilling the goal, right? So, there's a presidential proclamation. Our state legislature is mandating, that we celebrate it and that we include it in the secondary education, K-12, curriculum.
Right.
So do you feel that goals are being met as it relates to elevating the importance of scholarship or academic pursuits of Black history and the role of the month? That was a heavy one. I'm going to start with Professor Lawson, since he teaches we'll build off of whatever he shares.
I think we have to build on what we're already doing. And I say that because Black activists, well, that's what we call them now. They were called something quite different in the 20th century. The term African American or colored was I'm not going to say it was pejorative, but it had some pejorative, especially colored, had some pejorative attachments to it. But they were coalition builders. They reached across the aisle. There was, in the earlier part, I was like the 1930s and 40s, that during the Second World War, the March on Washington movement, that Blacks, at the time, the Black activists wanted to march on Washington because they wanted change, but they didn't want whites to be involved, white Americans to be involved. But that changed, all right? The second March on Washington movement in the 1950s, 60s, round about that time, because their organizing came about by bringing different coalitions of groups together. And coalition building is significant and it's historic, because if you're going to bring change in a particular conversation or atmosphere or social interaction or political interaction, you have to have advocates. And in having advocates, you've got to recognize their worth in your movement. And I think that example from the past is continuing to the present, that we can build on that. Yeah, do the proclamations from the federal government and state government passing laws to make certain that K through 12 Black history is taught, because you're mainstreaming, normalizing the message that Black history is American history. It's just American history told through the perspective of the Black experience, but it's still American history. And because we're doing that mainstreaming and that coalition building, what's happening is that everyone else's history who have contributed to the American dream, to contribute to what the American nation is being told also. So when you think about American history, you're not just thinking about someone who's white, you're thinking about someone who's white, who's Asian, who's Latino, Hispanic. You're thinking about various different ethnic groups and their contribution to the ongoing story of what it is to be American.
Love it. I'm not sure who wants to go after that, but I'll open it up to.
Ditto. I mean, I will say this. I believe I'm very impressed with the state of Connecticut, because as a public school teacher, I want to say, and I don't know if you know this, but I believe Connecticut is the first state to incorporate a Black and Latino study curriculum.
Yep. Shout out.
Wonderful.
Yes, so we are progressing. It's a shame that it is 2023 and it's happening now.
Yeah.
However, I will relish in the fact that it is being acknowledged, that our students will understand their history from their perspective. You know, we often hear, or I've always heard, that history is written from the perspective of the victor and not the victim. So this will give us a chance to hear those voices and really acknowledge and celebrate them.
Great.
You know, I'll just add that, and I certainly second the importance and the really critical step that our state has taken to say that we value this curriculum, and every child in our K-12 system should learn it. That's it's a remarkable step, and it's something that we should celebrate. To your question, Dr. Harris, generally about our goals, I mean, obviously we have work to do, because there are forces that, as we continue to make progress, there are forces that are still trying to, frankly, divide us and keep our country as a whole from making progress.
Sure.
So, I think what's so remarkable about American history and the Black experience and the Black struggle is how we are constantly making significant gains, but then facing challenges, but still pushing for to make our country, you know, better for everyone, and as long as we, you know, fend off any forces that are trying to divide us, you know, the struggle continues. But we've made, I think, clearly, we based upon where we are now, we know we've made great progress. But it never ends. We have to keep working.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and I'm looking at Dr. Partridge, and so last week, you know, Dr. Jelani Cobb was participating in our second annual Pennington lecture, and he made a reference to the fact that, you know, in terms of the struggle continues, and we continue to make strides and step forward, and we know for certain that we will never take a step back to zero. And I paraphrase exactly what he was mentioning. And so I think it's important to have that perspective in that context. With earlier today, I was participating in another Black History Month program where we were talking about the history and legacy of historically Black colleges and universities. And so, you know, we viewed a series that was on PBS about the history and legacy, and there was this piece where it started with, you know, denial, and their origins, you know, came from teachers and they started kind of at K-12, but then they recognized the need to continue into higher education and created an entire system of historically black colleges and universities. And so this idea of needing these spaces and the importance of education in that regard. I wanted to build on what we just discussed. And so you have a state like Connecticut who is leaning into the need to insist on education regarding black history. And I would suggest that it's certainly not, it's as important for my white neighbor's children as it is for my black son, Grant and Grayson, to learn black history. So, it's not as though these classes are created for BIPOC students. It's as important, equally important, for white students to certainly learn black history. And so we have a situation in Connecticut where our legislature and all the branches of government, fitting that we're in this space, are insisting. Our neighbors to the south in Florida are in a very different situation with regard to the promotion of all of a state's residents having the opportunity, even different situation because it's an AP course, certainly kind of, but denying students in their system the opportunity. Once again, equally important that black students as the white students in the state being denied the opportunity to engage in an AP course that focuses in on black history and touting it proudly and questioning the academic relevance of that particular curriculum, which has been adopted nationwide. And I understand there's whatever's going on with College Board and things like that, but the way that it's being presented is that the educational relevance of this course for our state, that I need to step in and deny that. So talk a little bit about what you feel is going on there, how you perhaps what and juxtapose and contrast perhaps Connecticut with what's going on in our neighbors to the south. And we'll start with Professor Freeman on that one.
I'll just say what's happening in Florida is scary. If the curriculum, whether it's looking at black queer studies, which was criticized by the ultimately removed from the curriculum, or other aspects, if we're not able to tell an honest history of all of our experiences, how are we ever going to learn and truly understand each other as Americans? And is the goal to truly understand each other as Americans, or the goal to find ways to be divided? And that's the question I would honestly ask any individual that's trying to deny any aspect of anyone's history from being taught. That doesn't serve us gaining a better cultural understanding and awareness and appreciation for each other and the struggles we all go through as Americans, but particularly the struggles of Black Americans and of all different, and the history, and this rich history which makes our country so remarkable. And as a country, clearly, we will continue to make and have the same fights and the same struggles and the same resentments and lack of understanding and, frankly, division, if we don't come to the place where we say we're truly going to understand and value each other equally. And we can't do that if we're ignorant. So denying anyone's history is really just a form of ignorance. It's really short-sighted, and it's really unfortunate. So I think there's a lot of individuals all around the country saying this is dangerous, not going to be helpful, and juxtaposed to what we're doing in our state, where we are taking really affirmative steps to saying we're going to value history, and we're going to value learning, and we want our students to understand and appreciate the differences of different cultures. It's really a stark difference. So I'm hopeful that I think we need to support our educators in Florida who are under and other places where they're under pressure to not teach certain things and to I think we need to certainly support our peer educators around the country, and that's doing the work ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, you're here. Yeah. Yeah. Professor Perez, thoughts on?
Oh gosh, this topic. This is the thing that makes me do this. There's a documentary called Precious Knowledge, and it's about a school system in Tucson, Arizona, where again, another representative tried to take away a course. I'm drawing a blank right now, but it's the same situation. Yeah. And I mean, the course was already in place. The students who would normally not perform well or didn't like school or anything like that came to school to be taught by teachers that looked like them, to be taught their history, and it was taken away, and it was tragic. And so what is happening right now in Florida just reminds me so much of that. And then it makes me think about, just that you mentioned resistance earlier, and this is a time to resist. Like, this is a time to say no. You cannot take our history away from us. You cannot take our identity away from us. In a way, you are taking a freedom away from us. So it is time to support those educators as well, but also you gotta resist, because so much has been taken away from us anyway, that if they take our education, then we literally have nothing left.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Professor Lawson.
Well, the exclusion of the teaching of a particular history is in itself a political statement. It's a form of censorship, but it's a political statement that I see as insidious. On his side, it may seem innocent, but it's not innocent at all. There's intent behind it. And one of the things I thought about while Shakira and Seth were giving their actual telling of answer to the question was the fact that I made the example about coalition building earlier. And I thought about Alan Turing. Alan Turing, famous computer scientist, he was white, he was male, but he was also gay. Alan Turing's algorithms were specifically important for World War II because they broke German codes. But because he was gay, the British government at the time had, I believe, isolated him, persecuted him, and it resulted in him committing suicide. He received a pardon posthumously from the Queen of England for any crimes that were created during the time. Then I think about an individual, that's computer science, and I think about an individual like James Baldwin, the Black activists, literalists during the time, who would leave the United States because this country would not recognize their genius and contribution as literary figures. I believe James Baldwin himself was gay. And I come to the conclusion, proving that this is insidious, if we take the time to exclude the fact that we won't teach certain history, not only is it a political statement, then that means that we are actually trying to take apart those coalitions that were actually created to justify and report and to celebrate the history of everybody else. When the Civil Rights Movement was going on, the Civil Rights Movement didn't just start in the 1960s. It was in the 1960s, the 1950s, the 1940s, the 1930s. It started pretty much after the end of slavery. Lots of individuals contributed to the Civil Rights Movement. Many of them look like me, many of them don't look like me. Many of them were men, women, abolitionists, or whatnot. If we take the time to exclude that history, then we're basically not honoring the coalitions that came together to make the country the way that we actually see it today. That means if you're excluding someone, why are you excluding them? Inclusion is about celebrating the differences of others. And say, for instance, I wanted to teach Black history. So if I'm teaching Black history and I'm talking about Harlem Renaissance and I'm bringing in James Baldwin as a literary figure, but I can't talk about his sexuality. Why not? Because that sense of his identity has something to do with who he became as that great writer. The same thing with Alan Turing. If you're talking about computers, there's different types of history. It's not just Black history. There's American history. There's history of technology, modernity. There's Latino, Hispanic history. There's so many different types of histories. If we're taking the time excluding personal attributes away from these historic individuals, then are we telling history? No, we're not. We're actually committing, in my opinion, a political statement. And that in itself is not only censorship, it's very insidious and it's dangerous and it shouldn't be allowed. We have to actually treat everyone equally. One of the things the country has had a problem with since its inception, well, I'm talking about inception, not Jamestown, I'm talking about the inception of the US government, when it became the United States of America, 1776 or whatnot, and the boast regarding George III and the American colonists at the time creating the nation July 4, 1776. It talks a lot about equality, talks a lot about the blessings of liberty, but the country has had a hard time living up to those blessings of liberty. And this is an example of it. If we allow this type of behavior to continue to exclude others, then are we really the democracy that we want to be?
Thank you. Awesome. See why he's the historian.
Yeah.
So, and I know we're running, and we want to make sure we have time for some questions. This will be the last question I'll ask, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. So get ready. That's your hint, students, to get your questions ready. And so some people think that Black history education is about two things, slavery and the civil rights movement. Do you think that there might be too much focus on these two particular areas? And I think you alluded to this a little bit, Professor Perez, but what other aspects of Black history should we be teaching to connect our students to ensure that they're have that fire in the belly for history and things like that. So talk a little bit about that and perhaps other areas that merit a deeper dive so that students can be impassioned about history. And we'll start with Professor Lawson. And I already said that we have questions coming up. So comport yourself accordingly.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to couch myself in how I respond. We may pay a little bit too much attention to the civil rights movement and slavery. And the criticism that can be made is that, individuals, when we talk about Black history, it's always about Martin Luther King, MLK, Rosa Parks, and whatnot, what have you. Just bringing in Malcolm X every now and then and whatnot, and then Langston Hughes and James Baldwin and all and whatnot, what have you. But there were other individuals who contributed to the movement, all right? And Fannie Lou Hamer is one of them that comes to mind, all right? Stokely Carmichael is another one who comes to mind in regards to that. So, we could concentrate on other aspects of Black history. We can also concentrate on the history of the slave trade on the islands of Puerto Rico, on the island of Jamaica, the Bahamas, Barbados. Why is that significant? Because the majority of the slaves that were taken during the Middle Passage were carried to the Caribbean, all right? Only a small percentage came to the US, all right? And that's a history that needs to be actually told, because Black history is not just the American story of the civil rights movement.
Sure. Good point. Awesome. Professor Freeman?
Well, I'll just answer that by saying, you know, our we all have to kind of see ourselves in this curriculum, and that's not just that's white students, black students,
Sure.
Asian students of all ethnicities, and I think too much focus on one certain periods of time may be limiting, um, and this history is so rich that um, students need to have the time to explore aspects of the history that most resonate with them. And I think that's what ultimately a more open-ended and curriculum provides. So I will just say that you know, students having the time and space to see what resonates with them and their experiences, and making the topics relevant to what students are going through nowadays, which does directly relate to these periods in history, may alleviate some of the feeling that it's too reductive.
It's interesting, and before we wrap up with Professor Perez, I oftentimes think about, in the way I've heard this expressed, as if black people's history began when they arrived on U.S. shores, and the level of dismissiveness in terms of the phenomenal civilizations that existed in Africa prior to, whether that's science and agriculture and all these other business and commerce and things of that nature, that is dismissed. And perhaps there's, some bad intentioned, desire to begin with the plight of enslaved peoples versus touting, what occurred prior to being removed from your family to come on these ships to engage in the economic, sense of slavery. So there's a piece of that. Professor Perez, your comments on that?
I believe that, I always have my students in mind, and I believe that they are the change makers. They are the ones that can change the narrative. Not that they need to rewrite history, but they can change it in a way that is more positive, that is more powerful and impactful. And that's one of the things that I like to instill in my students, is that you can make a difference no matter how small it is, no matter the volume of your voice, whatever it is that you believe in and you want to say, you can. Whatever you want to do, you can do. And it's just important for them to recognize that. And not just my black and brown students, of course, all of my students, but of course I have an affinity for my black and brown students, because I was once that kid that I grew up in the projects, and I just thought that was going to be my life. I was going to be a product of that environment, and I am, because I changed what the narrative was for that. And so it is important for them and all of you to realize that you can change the narrative. You can write your own narrative. You can write your own history, and it's important for you to know that you have the space and the voice to do that.
Awesome. Well done. At this point, we'd like to open it up to some questions for the audience. And so I think we have a microphone, because there are people at home. So we do want to make sure that any questions that are asked into the microphone, so folks can hear you at home.
Yes, just a reminder for folks to raise their hands if they want to be called on. Okay.
And for the students, if you don't raise your hand, I'm going to call on you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good
I
evening.
think it's hot. Yep.
My name is Jasmine, and I am a student at Capital Community College. Initially, my question was going to be in regards to what's happening in Florida. However, that's already been answered. But going off of that, and this will require your personal opinion, do you think we're really moving forward? Like, are we truly moving forward as students of color in the education system? What's happening in Florida, I feel like that is slightly a step back. And definitely not what I expected. I saw when it made the headlines, I was shocked to see that, taking that away from students, something that they should be learning. Do you think we are truly moving forward in learning about Black history, students of color, in the education system?
Let me go first, and then we'll pass it. And so, yeah, great question. That's my student. And she'll actually be going to Oxford to study in a couple of weeks. And so we have a new program where students, right? And so we'll be able to go. And so what I'm a little jealous of your generation, and based off of what I observed during the summer of 2020. I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in 1970, and I kind of I'm in between kind of the boomers who had the 60s and when they were out and doing sit-ins and in the streets and at table counters, demanding change. But when I saw you guys, a couple summers ago, and our students were out there, and a lot of you were in high school, and my son and things, it was affirming that we are making progress. And I spend time with you all, and I hear you, building a case for support, for change, and what you need, and Mr. Ward working with you all, and being there, the strong support person that you need to know that you has your back, and so I do feel like we're making progress. You may not be aware of it, and sometimes I'd imagine as we describe what happened, at this point centuries ago, that we're still kind of discussing, and tiki torches and UVA and things like that, and so, but it might be hard for you to know, but me as a person in my 50s now, I do feel like we're making progress, and things are very different even than when I went to college years ago. And so you may not be aware, but I do feel, I'm not sure how the panelists, and I'll kick it off to the other panelists, round robin.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with you. I do believe that there is progress. It may not be that immediate, instant gratification you may be looking for, but the fact that we are here now in 2023 and we have, let's say, a curriculum that focuses on Black and Latino studies, what I would like to see is more of what you're doing, more of what the students are doing. It needs to come from your generation. It needs to come from there. I believe that has more of an impact than a bunch of legislators in a building saying, hey, let's include this curriculum. No, it's because you want it, because you demand it. And so when it comes from you, then it'll be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Lawson?
I believe that we have made progress. I try to listen to the younger generation, and one of the things I hear often is that why do we have to fight the battles that we've already won, all right? And freedom is never really free, all right? It requires sacrifice, it requires maintenance. And to give you kind of like a perspective on that, when I was a student at Central Connecticut State University and I was finishing my bachelor's degree, instead of testing out, I could have tested I wanted to write. And my senior paper for my bachelor's degree was Colonialism and African Science. Well, the advisor I had at the time said to me, Marcus, I don't think there's any research material on that. And she was my French professor. Did I argue with her? No. I ignored her and I went around her. So I went to my African studies professor. Her name is Dr. Gloria Imegwali. She still teaches at Central. And I said to her, Dr. Imegwali, this professor says that there's no research material on this, and she was incensed. And she called her, basically told her, I will be Marcus's advisor going forward, which she was. She got me material from the University of Egypt. She got material from the University of London. I wrote my paper on colonialism and African science, got my A, and went on about my business. You have to insist on that. Yep. And I have to, as now I'm in a different position. I'm the professor teaching Black history, teaching history. I have to listen to your generation and say, okay, Latino studies, love to teach you about Puerto Rico, yes, but there are different Latinos. There's Hondurans, Salvadorans, there's Brazilians. We have to look at all of that history and embrace it and bring it to the classroom. Because teaching Black history, like I said, it's not just about the Black experience from Black Americans. It's all from the Caribbean and the Americas, all right? And once we take that perspective as professors, then you will see that we'll continue to make progress because we're insisting on teaching all of the history, not just some of it, all of it.
Well, I'll just second what an excellent question. I think it's a question that we all ask ourselves a lot. And I think undoubtedly, if you, based upon where we are, the access to information that we have now, we've certainly made progress, but clearly, and we can see what's happening in Florida right now as a backlash to what happened in summer of 2020. So this is the remarkable history of our country. As we make more progress, and as we get stronger, and as we demand this, what's never been true, a true multiracial democracy, as we demand that, there are still those who want to deny that. So I think it's just an understanding of, I would say at this point in my life, this is a struggle that, this is an ongoing struggle, and I think if you're asking the question, then you know that you're asking yourself, how do I navigate in this struggle, and how do I contribute to this, my energy to making a difference? And as long as you're asking that question, and other, and we're all asking ourselves that question, then we have hope to make it better. So that's what I would say.
We have any other questions? We've got. Now they're on. These are all my students over here. That's good.
So
Our students.
What happened in Florida? They kind of set a precedent. They kind of told us that this is something that they would allow to happen. This is something that is okay. That's by kind of skimming down the curriculum like that. They kind of told everyone that was affected by it that it doesn't matter what their opinion was on the subject. So how do we as students, even if we're a part of a different state, keep that from happening in other states? Because I feel like this kind of sets off a domino effect where more people in high positions in other states are going to try to attempt the same thing and continue to skim down the curriculum.
Yeah, and we'll round robin. Once again, this afternoon, I was fortunate to watch a series and about the civil rights movement and what was occurring in many of the southern states with sit-ins. And there were hundreds of students who were sitting in throughout the entire South, and that prompted the change. And so what's occurring in terms of on our college campuses nationwide, has the ability to affect change. There's certainly kind of a legislature, but I think, and there's another piece to, it being framed as a woke or whatever. And, you could think about the concept of somebody being asleep and what you're able to do. And so there's nothing wrong with certainly being awoke. And I think that I'm hearing that from you, that people are watching to see what's going to happen. And it will come a time to lash back with regard to some of these attempts that are being made to deny access to information and education and awareness and enlightenment, right? And so, so I do feel as though they're probably drawing some attention that they may not want, over these next few months, and in a good way, and that there will be, buttressed resistance to what is attempting to be done, because we've seen this before throughout history. And so I'm kind of glad that it's happening, and perhaps we had begun to fall asleep again after the summer 2020 or what have you, and statements and DEI coordinators and things like that. But we need to be aware and ever vigilant, for things like what we're observing. And I was just in Florida talking to some friends, and don't get it twisted. The people of Florida, in large numbers, are not enamored with that. And they're beginning to get their dry powder ready to resist, as we talk about now. But they'll need our support, to ensure that as a nation we indicate that that's not okay. So I don't know if anybody else would move.
I agree. I mean, I think you have to understand that the individual who's doing this is a politician. So he's testing the waters to see how far he can get away, what he can get away with. And because he's a politician, he's trying to see what he can get away with. It also shows you, in my viewpoint, that he's miscalculating a little bit, all right? And because he's miscalculating, he's going to get a reaction, okay? And it's already happened, I think, in New Jersey.
Sure.
New Jersey, like, we'll take it up. We have no problem with that at all whatsoever, And I think that's what he's doing. He's testing the waters to see, one, am I going to go for a presidential run? How will I do? I'll do well in Florida, which actually has a great, electoral count points towards the presidential election or whatnot. But how will I do in the rest of the country? And I think that's what's going on. And we can't be disheartened by the chicanery, the trickery of what he's trying to do, and be encouraged to continue to resist. Like Dr. Harris says, remember the lessons from history, that there were students that stood up and they wanted change. I was thinking about Bethune-Cookman University, Mary McLeod Bethune, civil rights activist in the Roosevelt administration, all right? But she founded that college, which became a university.
Yep.
Right, exactly. Don't be disheartened by the fact that this individual is trying to trick the rest of the country into his snare of division, all right? Because essentially, if he keeps doing it, he's going to get a reaction. He may not get the reaction that he wants. And just because people are being quiet right now doesn't mean that people are happy with him. So just remember that.
We're able to take just one more question, so.
So the question that I had was, what do you have to say, especially for, whereas you guys are Northeast teachers, so we tend to be considered like the more liberal part of the country. What do you have to say for like your students who may struggle with things such as like silent racism? So that could be like microaggressions in classes or minimalizing their struggles, especially amongst like, we're in Black History Month, but some people may equalize our struggles with other minority groups and such like that.
We'll open that up. Professor Perez?
So, it's been a journey for me as a teacher of color. There was a time when I was silent because I was one of 3 teachers of color at my school. And I also didn't have tenure, so I just was quiet on purpose too. But it wasn't until, and I felt that. I felt microaggressions. I felt, the whispers. I felt that my colleagues felt that I was not competent enough, that I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't have, there was that feeling that you are not good enough to teach. And so I carried that for a number of years. And it took an administrator she was a Jamaican woman, and she said to me, you need to let your voice be heard. Literally changed my life. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that because these people aren't going to listen to me anyway. So I did. I said, no more. It was time for me to stand up for myself, stand up for who I was. I know that I'm intelligent. I know that I'm competent. I know that I got this. And it was when I did that people started to listen. So I had to make space for myself. And somewhere there were no more seats around the table, I sat my butt down. right here on the edge, right in between these two people, I sat down.
Good.
And when I did, literally my life changed professionally, and it changed, personally, professionally. It was a different world for me. And it was, I'm going to do a little shameless plug here, but in 2020, I was Hartford Public Schools Teacher of the Year. And to
Hey.
me, oh, thank you. But to me, it was so much more than that. It was like, for me, it was a win for the city because I am a product of Hartford Public Schools. I'm an Afro-Latina, and it was just, look at me, I am here, I was heard, I stood up for myself. So it is important to don't make yourself small, don't dim your light. Just stand up, make noise, be in all your melanated glory, and someone will listen.
Awesome. Professor Freeman?
I'll just add, you have to challenge any structure that attempts to minimize you, whether it's a microaggression or any structure that you identify is wrong. You have to challenge it, and you'll find at Capitol, you'll find administrators like Dr. Harris and others that will support you doing that. And you'll find faculty and staff that will support you doing it. And even if you find a faculty and staff that doesn't support you, you'll find others that will. Sure. But you have to assert. We have to, I believe that's in my understanding of making space as well, right? We have to assert what we each understand we deserve. And that's the power that others are trying to hold back from us. But we pride ourselves to not doing that at Capitol, obviously. That's how can we make Capitol or any of our institutions here in Connecticut a space? How do we distinguish ourselves from these other institutions that are objectively acting in bad ways by telling our students and living that and saying, assert what you know is correct and we'll support you. So,
People tend to believe that because you're quiet, that you're unintelligent, and I face it all the time, all right? Whether it's at Capitol or anywhere I go, I face that because I'm not the type of person that puts myself out in front. I like to work behind the scenes. I like to support people, and because I don't take up the statewide committees and all of it, what have you, I'm perceived as being a lightweight, all right, intellectually. Oh, he doesn't have a PhD and all those type of stuff about what have you. You believe whatever you want. I don't really care. But once they challenge me and they try to put me down, never make yourself look small for anyone, but also never, ever, ever forget to be professional, to be scholarly, to know what your opinion and your thesis is, know how to support it, know how to argue intelligently, not negatively. You don't have to call people names. You have to go through that. You're basically lowering yourself by doing that. Raise the conversation, all right? And once they see that's who you are as an intelligent, well-spoken, educated person, it will shock them into silence, and they will eventually have to respect you. That's all I have to say.
Well, and on that note, can we have a round of applause for the panelists? That's great. And once again, I just wanted to thank everybody who's here, who's home, and then we'll turn it over to Michael.
Yes, so we still have our round table or our table cafe right across from the courtroom. So feel free to go in and, come in together and have discussions and have some refreshments as well outside too. So yeah, but thank you so much for coming here today.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.